From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I want to welcome everyone here today. I'm Barbara Tillett, the Chief of the Policy and Standards Division here at the Library of Congress, and I'm also a member of the Joint Steering Committee for the Development of RDA. So it's with those two hats on that I'm here to talk with you today. We're going to look at some of the really major changes from AACR2, focusing really on the kinds of changes related to text materials that the most of us here at the Library of Congress deal with. These are books, textual serials, updating loose leafs, digitized texts, and websites in particular. So those of you dealing with other kinds of materials, we will be dealing with those later in the year. But for today, we're focusing on these things. This session today, since it's just 1 hour, is going to be just a general overview of some of the changes from the Anglo-American Cataloguing Rules 2nd edition, and changes from ELSI's policies as stated in the ELSI rule interpretations, as well as some of the changes that have come along with the MARC format for bibliographic and authority records. Some of the decisions that we will be making on the ELSI practice for our test of RDA are still very tentative or in process, so I'll be addressing those as I go along. A lot more information and examples and more exercises and more training will be given to all of our catalogers here when the time comes if the decision is made to implement RDA. That will probably be coming along at the end of this year or at the beginning of 2011, so there's still lots of time for us to be ready to do this. However, the RDA test will begin middle of this year, and so we want to have people involved in that ready to help us with that. In your handout is the URL, and you see it here, for the information about the RDA test that's taking place this year. It is being steered by the National Library of Medicine, the National Agriculture Library, and the Library of Congress for 24 additional participants within the United States. We are expecting to begin that test as soon as the public version of RDA is available. There may be an early ramp-up testing of it, but we are still not positive the exact date yet. I've already discussed with you in some of the previous presentations that we've done over the last year or two about the conceptual models that are underlying this new set of cataloging standards. The IFLA, the International Federation of Library Associations, has had a very major role to play in coming up with the underlying conceptual models of FRBR, Functional Requirements for Bibliographic Records, FRAD, which is known as the Functional Requirements for Authority Data, and also there are the basic principles that are now approved internationally in the IFLA Statement of International Cataloging Principles, known as ICP. So remember, FRAD and FRBR are the entities, the relationships, and the user tasks that are underlying RDA, and the ICP are the basic principles that are underlying RDA. The organization of RDA is very different from AACR2. First of all, RDA is a web tool, and it's meant to be used by searching and going in and pulling together to display all of the related instructions that are relevant to what you're looking for. It's not intended to be read from page 1 to the end. RDA publishers are going to be providing training on how to use the new product. But for the content, instead of separate chapters for all of the classes of materials like books and cartographic materials and printed music and continuing resources and microforms, etc., RDA instead is organized around the goals or the tasks, the user tasks, to help users identify and to relate the resources that they need from our collections. The identifying element for each thing that we are describing are addressed separately in each chapter, but RDA will be a web tool where you can view the instructions that you need together. In addition to providing instructions on what identifying elements are needed, there are instructions on how to assemble those elements to create an access point in bibliographic and authority records for works and expressions, for persons, for families, for corporate bodies. So during a transition period, we're still going to be establishing headings, as we call them under AACR2, but RDA calls them authorized access points. Here's the overall organization of RDA, reflecting the two goals of identifying and relating. The first part is on identifying all of the resources that we need to present for our users, and the remainder is on making the relationships. And RDA is an online tool, so you'll be able to view all of the relevant instructions displayed for you together. I already mentioned that there's new terminology in RDA, and here you'll see some of the main concepts that were expressed in AACR2 and then in RDA. Some of the changes reflect turning away from the card catalog environment, and some reflect terminology in the functional requirement models and the international cataloging principles. During the training, we're going to provide a handout with tables showing pre-RDA context and then the RDA context for both bibliographic and authority data, so that all of the elements and all of the terminology will be presented for you. And that handout will show some other vocabulary changes besides what you see here. This is just sort of the tip of the iceberg. And it will also give the specific instruction numbers where those concepts are addressed in RDA. So you'll have a lot more valuable handouts and tools to use as you're beginning to learn about the specific use of RDA. The FRBR conceptual model groups the things that we want to identify for users for the convenience of talking about them. So it has group 1 entities: work, expression, manifestation, and item. These are the resources that we're describing. Group 2 are the entities of person, family, corporate bodies. These are things that play some role with respect to those things that are the resources. And group 3 entities are all the things that are subjects of works. These can be other works in the group 1 entities. It can be all of the persons, families, and corporate bodies in the group 2 entities, or it can be concept, object, and event in place. But I think what's most important here is that RDA states what things are important to identify in our bibliographic universe that is made up of all of the things that we want to identify for our users. They're the things in our collections that we have in the past made bibliographic and authority records for. During the RDA test, and for some time into the future, we won't have the new technology and the new encoding systems that will allow libraries to gain the most benefit from RDA. We're going to have our current ILS systems for several years to come. And so during this interim period, or this bridge period, until we have new systems and new services for bibliographic control, we're continuing to encode and display our bibliographic and our authority data just as we do today. We will be using the Mark 21 bibliographic and authority formats for the RDA elements. We'll be using the ISBD structure and punctuation for the descriptive information. And like AACR2, we will use the same punctuation as AACR2 for the access points, which was not prescribed by ISBD, but was in AACR2. AACR2 had different levels of description, and LC usually cataloged at the second level, a middle ground. RDA identifies instead a basic set of core elements to ensure the user tasks of find, identify, select, and obtain. Agencies that are preparing descriptions can have their own policies on what additional elements will be provided, or they can allow catalogers to decide on their own using catalogers' judgment. Or there can be a combination of these. The agency can prescribe things, and some things can be left to catalogers' judgment. The policy and the standards division here at the Library of Congress is making proposals right now on what other elements should be included in the Library of Congress's bibliographic and authority records for the RDA test. And we're calling this the LC Core Plus. Beyond the expanded list, the inclusion of other elements will be based on catalogers' judgment. So it will be up to you to decide what additional elements are needed for the particular thing that you're describing. We fully expect that the LC processing units outside of ABA will also be working with us in PSD to create their core plus lists of essential elements. Just as AACR2 had some options and alternatives, RDA also offers choices to some instructions, more than just deciding what elements to provide beyond the core list. There are alternatives, as they're labeled, which are to do something different from the previous instruction. And there are optional omissions and optional additions, which mean, as you can imagine, to provide something additional if you want to, or omit something from what the instruction before said to do. There are also instructions that refer to the policy of the agency that's creating the description. And most of those are the result of expanding RDA beyond the Anglo-American focus of AACR2 to be more international in scope. In other words, you can follow the agency's policy for what language you use, what script you use, what numeric system you use, and so on. The Policy and the Standards Division here at LC will be posting our recommendations on the choices for the RDA test that were approved by our ABA management team. When PSD has not made a recommendation, that decision will be left to catalogers' judgment. In fact, RDA relies much more on catalogers' judgment than does AACR2 and our LC rule interpretations. There was a PCC task group that reviewed our existing LCRIs, and their report was the basis for a similar review that we conducted in PSD to make recommendations on the choices for the RDA test. Many of the LCRIs were already incorporated into RDA as part of regular instructions. This was intentional on the part of the Library of Congress, introducing those as proposals for RDA. But about 1/4 of the current LCRIs are going to be retained and revised to tentatively be called LC policy statements, or LCPS. We're currently planning to add those to the RDA web tool to give further guidance for catalogers and for others that are following our practices. Let's now look at some screenshots of RDA Online to see how the cataloging documentation can be used. This is a view of the main homepage of RDA as an online web tool. There's a feature in this online tool to mark the text with your own annotations and to share some of those annotations. They can be inserted into a particular instruction, like attaching a sticky note in your print version. We think that we will be using the annotations in RDA for the retained LCRI's content and for our preliminary decisions on the options and alternatives within RDA for the test, when we determine that catalogers' judgment is not to be applied. For example, when we want to have consistency in a particular element. So in preparation for the RDA test, we're working with the ALA publisher to see how best to load that information into the online tool. Catalogers will also be able to add their own notes to specific instructions in the RDA Online tool. Another help for catalogers in the RDA Online tool will be workflows, which are step-by-step processes for a specific task or for creating a record for a specific resource. There will be links between the RDA citations in the workflows and the RDA instructions themselves, so you can hopefully go back and forth between them. We haven't seen this in action yet, so we're just anticipating what the functionality will be. The workflows, that's interesting, can be used for training or for consultation when cataloging a resource outside your own area of expertise. The workflow that's shown here is for a simple book, a single part published printed monograph. PSD will be creating some other workflows for the RDA test, and we hope that others that are participating in the RDA test will also contribute workflows of their own that they find useful. And we may find that we can use the workflow wizard, which would be a feature within RDA Online, as the place for some of the longer descriptions and explanations in the LC policy statements, some of the things that we have as many-paged LCRIs right now. But now, before we review some of the specific changes that are found in the RDA instructions, I just want to check to see if you have any questions so far about what I've covered. Aaron's asking about the ability to essentially include annotations for a particular community and share those within the Library of Congress and even broader. And yes, that is the intention of the functionality. Exactly how we'll implement that, we don't know yet, but that certainly is the functionality that is intended. Okay, let me just go on then. One of the RDA principles is based on the International Cataloging Principle of Representation, which was included in that 2009 Statement of International Cataloging Principles from IFLA. It can be paraphrased as you see here. Take what you see and accept what you get. The reason for this change is to encourage and to facilitate the ability to take metadata from publishers or from digital objects themselves that we are cataloging without having to change that data. There will be much less adjusting of the information that's found on the resource or provided by publishers. One example of that representation principle is not to abbreviate or replace words that are found on resources. Following this principle, you would not correct errors in transcribed fields. If it's important, you would explain the error and you would give an access point for the corrected form. The one exception that we show here is that when we have a title proper for a serial or an integrating resource, we're going to continue to use the 245 as the source for naming the serial work. And the current agreements with ISBD and ISSN communities are being honored, so we would adjust for serial titles. So an incidental typo won't affect the overall name of such a serial resource. In this example for a book, there's an access point for the corrected form of the book's title proper, which also will be an access point to get the user to this record. But you'll notice there's also a typo in the publisher's name, and maybe we don't need to accommodate that as an additional access point because we don't feel normally that that's important to explain. So we would just leave it alone. That's going to be hard for us as catalogers because we want to fix it and we want to explain to our users that we knew it was wrong, but resist. Users are really much more flexible and they understand what you're trying to say. The Library of Congress didn't use all of the general material designators in AACR2, the GMDs, in our bibliographic records. We only limited it to some of them. But we have now replaced the GMDs with 3 new elements within RDA, and 2 of those 3 new elements are content type and carrier type, which are the ones we're going to focus on for our RDA test. The ABA management team has approved the PSD recommendation to not use media type, which offers a general way of referring to the carrier types, because we're hoping that that media type data will be generated by machine based on the carrier type. There is a one-to-one specific relationship, and we're hoping that can be computer supplied and catalogers don't have to give it. The 3 new MARC fields for these 3 new elements that are replacing the GMD, though, have been established. And on this slide, you also see this warning at the bottom that the new carrier type and the extent information that we've been typically giving in the 300 subfield A, and will continue to give there, have some overlapping terminology, and it may be a little confusing at first as to what goes where. We'll look at some of those examples in just a minute. The 3 new MARC fields are repeatable, and they include a subfield 2 for the particular source or the vocabulary that's being used for those controlled terms. RDA has controlled vocabularies for each of these elements that we arranged with the publishing community, the Onyx community. For our RDA test, there will be templates in Voyager for the different resources, and the correct terms will already be supplied in those templates for these fields. So basically, you usually won't have to even worry about them. We are not going to change our practice for the leader 06 for the primary content type, or for the 006 controlled field for some serials and some electronic resources. Those will remain the same as we've been doing. These are probably two of the most simple situations for resources cataloged here at the Library of Congress, a book and a print serial. The content type in the 336 field is text, as you'll see in both of these situations. The media type, which I mentioned we can derive by machine, is unmediated, and that just means that you don't need any kind of device to use the resource. You can just pick it up and use it. The carrier type for both of these is volume, you'll notice in the 338 field. But the records for books will most often still have pages in the extent, the 300 subfield A, because it's not really the same as the carrier type. Where it can be confusing is that in some situations, as here in the serial example, the term used in the extent is the same term that appears in the carrier type. With the templates already having content in the 336 through 338 fields, you'll only need to supply the information in the 300 subfield A extent area. You'll notice also that we're not using abbreviations anymore in the 300 subfield A in both of the examples. We're trying to be clearer for our users to understand what we mean and to avoid abbreviations when we can. Here are two other examples. For an online PDF, the 337 media type in these examples is not unmediated as we had before because you do need a computer in order to read these resources. Notice in the first example for the online PDF that we can show the extent in the 300 subfield A both as being one online resource, but we can also show the total number of pages that are there to give the user a better idea of the extent. The website example also shows, the second one that's there, also shows that those marked fields can be repeated as needed. And this website has 3 types of content recorded in multiple 336 fields. Another option, when the source for the vocabulary is the same, for example, here the subfield 2 says mark carrier, or subfield 2 in the 336 says mark content. When you have the same one, you can have repeatable subfield A's. That's another option. We haven't come up with what convention we will be following yet here at the Library of Congress, but that decision will be made over the next few months. AACR2 has a rule of 3 when transcribing names in a statement of responsibility. For example, if there are more than 3 names in a single statement, you just give the first one with square bracket et alia, et al abbreviated. RDA, following the representation principle, says just transcribe what's on the resource. But RDA does have an option that says you can shorten the statement of the responsibility. So the LC participants in the test will be instructed, though, not to apply that option because we would like to see the impact of just taking what you see. The cataloger will also have to decide how many access points to give for those entities that are named in the statement of responsibility. However, we expect to give guidance to the LC catalogers after the ABA management team has a chance to consider this and some other big policy decisions later this year. Here now we have 2 versions of transcribing a statement of responsibility with more than 3 names. The first one shows the RDA instruction to transcribe what is on the resource, another instance of the representation principle. The second one shows the result of following the RDA option to just make a shortened version and explain that you have 4 others. We would not use at all anymore. Numbering is another transcribed area where RDA invokes the representation principle. We will record terms and chronological designations as they are found on the resource. Because RDA was developed to be less Anglo-centric, the style of the numerals is one of the areas where RDA says a cataloging agency can prefer to use a different system than what is found on the resource. So for example, if the numbers are written in true Arabic script, as in Sanskrit type numbers, you, as a cataloging policy agency, could say we are to use the normal Arabic numbers that we use within the rest of the world. However, the LC decision for the RDA test will be to record the numerals as you find them on the resource. And also, LC catalogers who are following the CONSER standard record guidelines can choose to apply the RDA alternative to give the serial numbering as an unformatted note. So we'll have some specific wiggle room there. Here are two examples that illustrate recording the information as you find it on the resource. So not changing to English abbreviated forms. Latin abbreviations are not to be used when applying RDA because most users don't understand them. Who knows what sine loco, sine nomine means? If you hadn't been taught in library school or as part of your cataloging training, would you know? For missing information in publication, distribution, and other such statements, RDA says to supply the phrases that you see here. And it's intended to be in the language of the cataloging agency. So it would say, place of publication not identified, publisher not identified, date of publication not identified. We're going to provide macros for these strings to supply the wording in the RDA test records to see how this will work. RDA's carrier description is comparable to AACR2's physical description in the MARC field 300. However, with RDA, we are following the international cataloging principles again to put our users first and give our descriptive information in a form they can read and understand. So we avoid abbreviations and we avoid the use of square brackets. They didn't know what those meant either. But you'll notice that we are not using full stops after the metric symbols because they are not considered abbreviations. For example, you'll notice in that second example of the 86 pages, you'll see that a full stop is not used after the two metric symbols CM because they don't appear at the end of a field. In the other two examples, the CM is at the end of a field, and so the full stop there is just indicating the end of a field, not the abbreviation. We've already seen, I know. We've already seen some examples with the 300 field for an online resource, but there are some others. These examples show the use of spelled out words because non-catalogers don't always know what ill means or what port means. And the word unnumbered is used instead of enclosing the numeral in square brackets. Another cataloging practice that non-catalogers didn't understand. Here we have a CD-ROM example that shows the use of an abbreviation in 300 subfield C. So we do have an exception to the RDA practice because those abbreviations with CD-ROMs are a standard unit of measurement that is widely used internationally. You can also see here in that second example that the 300 field for an updated website can be very simple because a cataloger can choose to omit information that's likely to change often. Series statements follow the same kinds of instructions as for serials. That is, the same RDA practice for transcribing terms and numerals as found on the resource for the numbering of serials in the 362 field applies when you're transcribing series numbering in the 4XX field. Again, you take what you see. Just as there is no longer a rule of 3 when transcribing names in a statement of responsibility, there's now a difference in how RDA says to name a work based on the number of creators that are involved. If primary responsibility is shared or isn't stated, the default is to use the first named creator, according to RDA. The Policy and Standards Division's working on a recommendation for how many additional access points for other creators we would be including for the RDA test. Here we have an example that shows an RDA record naming the work by using the first named creator. This is for a situation where no one is listed as being primarily responsible. In an AACR2 record, this work would be named only by its title. As a result, we lost lots of access points that users may be looking for. For treaties, with one exception, naming a treaty is the same regardless the number of signatories. That is, we name it by the first named signatory. The AACR2 exception for treaties with only one government on one side was carried over to RDA based on advice from the law community. PSD is considering its recommendation for how many additional access points for other signatories should be included. For the Bible, many of you here at the Library of Congress helped develop the proposals that resulted in these changes in practice from AACR2 that are now reflected in RDA. We will not be abbreviating the names of testaments, and we will not include the name of the testament when creating access points for individual books or groups of books on the Bible. So you see here Old Testament spelled out and Bible Apocrypha. We expect to make the changes to our legacy records by global update in Voyager when the time comes, so that our database will be consistent. RDA is eliminating the use of Polyglot. The presence of Polyglot doesn't help a user know what languages are there for the content, and it prevents a computer system from being able to provide a limit or a filter to restrict a search to a specific language. We're trying to get rid of that. RDA says to name each language expression in the work. And in the future, following RDA, when you limit searches to specific languages, you should retrieve much more accurate results of what is actually available in the collections. FRAD, which is the Functional Requirements for Authority Data, provides some specific identifying characteristics or elements to describe persons, families, and corporate bodies. Not all of these attributes are used in authorized access points, what AACR2 calls headings, but they do help to identify these entities and may be used in the future in really creative new ways. Some of you may have seen how creatively VIAF, or the Virtual International Authority File, is able to make use of some of the data that we've been providing in our records for many, many years, such as forming a timeline of the dates of publication of a person's works, or forming a geographic map of where in the world those persons' publications have been published. All of that information does not have to be put into a heading or an authorized access point. You can just include it as a cluster of information that describes that particular entity. And that information there is there then to be able to display to users in future systems. Here we have listed some of the new attributes for the entity person that have been added to the authority format in their own individual fields. Right now, when we have this kind of information, we typically include it in a 670 field. But as a result, they're not easily used by a computer system. By labeling them specifically, future systems and services should be better able to use that information. I also want to point out that RDA considers non-human entities to be in scope as persons. They're considered individuals. And so with RDA, we can specify those individuals and what role each of those individuals play with respect to a work, expression, manifestation, or item that we're describing. For example, at the work level, we can say that a work is created by that particular entity. At the expression level, we can say it was translated by that particular person or entity. At the manifestation level, we can say it was published by that entity. And at the item level, we can say a role such as it's held in that particular institution. Right now, we have some of these non-humans expressed in our subject authority records, and PSD is considering recommendations for the change for including them in name authorities. There are 5 fields being added to the authority format for specific attributes of corporate bodies. Just as for persons, This information has been included in the 670 field in some corporate body authority records now, following our current and our past practice, but we will be specifying them in their own fields for the future use by computers. As we noted earlier, two of the main goals of FRBR and FRAD are to identify and to relate. Until now, we've been focusing mostly on identification with AACR2. The way we typically state a relationship is to say what is related to what and in what type of relationship. A is related to B, and how is that relationship made? What kind of relationship is it? For example, to say that Shakespeare is the author of Hamlet. You may remember that example from some earlier presentations I've given. RDA gives different conventions for making relationships between persons, families, corporate bodies, and the resources, and we'll go through each of those in just a moment. But basically, you can do three kinds of things. One is to use an identifier for the things that are being related. Two is to use an authorized access point for the things being related. These are typically what we do now by providing a heading. Three is to provide descriptions for the related things. So let's first look at persons. There are two methods suggested in RDA, but for the RDA test, we're not going to use the identifier alone because we're still relying on the text strings in Voyager to be able to provide access. In addition to naming the person by using an identifier or an access point, RDA includes a relationship designator to show what the role is that the person plays with respect to the resources being described. In the MARC format, that's shown with a relator term or a relator code. The Policy and Standards Division will be making recommendations about using relationship designators for this and for other kinds of relationships. This is one example, you can probably see it better on your handout, that shows using an authorized access point, including the relationship designator in subfield E for the translator of this Swedish children's story. So we give the basic description of the resource itself, and then in a 700 field, we identify the person who is the translator and indicate the relationship that person has to that particular resource. As for relationships between resources, RDA provides three methods again for relating one resource to another, as shown here and as I mentioned before. Again, the Library of Congress will not use the identifier all by itself during the RDA test because our current Voyager system does require the text string in an access point. But let's look at some examples. Here we have some relationships between resources illustrating the two different methods, one of using an authorized access point, which is probably what we'll use here at the Library of Congress, and another showing a structured description so you can see what that means. The translation of is the relationship designator, and it is one of many that's included in Appendix J of RDA. The relationships could be shown in a MARC record also, in addition to what we do here with a 700 field translation of and a 500 field saying translation of. We could also use a 765 field for the resource in its original language. So we have many techniques available in the MARC format, and we have not come up with a decision yet as to which we will use for the RDA test. Here we have an example of using a MARC linking field to give an unstructured description for the related resource, and we include three identifiers. The ISSN is included, the LC control number, LCCN is included, and the OCLC record number are here. So we can have multiple identifiers as well. For relationships between persons, families, and corporate bodies, there are two RDA methods that are shown here, using an identifier and also using an authorized access point. And again, the identifier by itself will not be used for the RDA test by the Library of Congress. In this example of an authority record, the term in subfield I is the relationship designator from now RDA's Appendix K that lists all of the possible relationship designators that can be used between persons and corporate bodies and families. So we're saying 500, this is in the authority record now, 500, a related person, Samuel Clemens, which is actually the name of the real identity for this person. So, just as for many years we had annual updates for AACR2, we now have more than 4 years of updates to catch up with. We have changes since the 2005 version of AACR2, and we have changes in the MARC format to learn. We hope most of the changes will make it easier for our users to understand the bibliographic records that we are providing for them, and that it will also be easier for catalogers in the future to create bibliographic descriptions and to provide authority data. I've given you the list of the URLs for the previous webcasts that give a lot more background on RDA and its foundations. If you didn't have a chance to come hear them in person, I would recommend that you take a look at them over this coming year so that you can be well prepared for when we are exploring training for RDA. And now I think I will thank you for your attention, and we will entertain some questions. Yes, at the front here. We have slide 45,
That top example,
the top example.
I'm just wondering why the redundancy between 240 and 700 doesn't look like.
Right. This is so that within the this is just showing the possibility within the MARC format right now, and we are addressing exactly that kind of redundancy to see, is this really what we want to perpetuate? And we will be exploring that. It does seem redundant and unnecessary. Now, the additional thing you get, though, with the subfield I in the 700 field is the specific relationship designator, what's going on. But hopefully there are better ways to accomplish it than that kind of redundancy. So we're still exploring that. Susan.
I have two questions. I think you covered them and I missed the point. The first is there a list on the JSC website of the RDA core elements, or are they still being identified?
No, the core elements are in RDA itself, and there is a list. There is also a handout that will be provided to all of our trainers for the RDA test that goes not only just the RDA core elements, but the core plus that we are suggesting be used for the test. So that will be provided. And you had another one?
Yes, for Bible headings for English language Bible headings, will we be using Roman numerals? For instance, Bible period, Roman numeral 2, Samuel?
Yes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I was just wondering, in 300 field, you said abbreviations are not there.
Usually, there's an exception, though, for you saw for the CD-ROM and for some audiovisual materials.
But when you said color, what about the spelling?
That's right. It can be according to your cataloging agency policy. So, for example, here in the United States, color is C-O-L-O-R, not C-O-L-O-U-R. We may have an agreement with the other Anglo national libraries to follow some other standard, but for now, RDA says to use what your cataloging agency recommends.
Also, you said no abbreviations.
Right.
Chiefly, but I see the abbreviation inches and centimeters.
Excuse me?
I see the abbreviation for centimeters and inches.
Exactly. I was just saying that for those that are in international usage and are very commonly known on an international scale, we do follow those abbreviations. So inches, centimeters, so forth will be used. Although centimeters is not an abbreviation, it is the symbol. Aaron?
Is there any prospect of getting Voyager or whatever we eventually have instead to do a lot of this automatically? Like if I put a key in a 300 field, subfield A, say, change it immediately to pages, because I know Word does often when you don't want it to, will fill out abbreviations.
Actually, we're really hoping that it will be done globally, and that a lot of those kinds of changes can be done globally, and the cataloger won't have to worry about it at all. We're hoping that a lot of that kind of cleanup can be done prior to the test. If the decision is made to implement RDA, we are hoping that we can do a lot of that kind of pre-implementation cleanup. Exactly. You shouldn't have to worry about it when you catalog. It should already be done for you. So that's what we're hoping for. So you don't need to worry about it. Yes, here? Exactly, and that's why I said that media type is going to be system supplied if we provide it at all. We think we don't need it, and we're not going to be asking our catalogers to provide it during the RDA test. To me, it is unnecessary information, but there may be some computer systems that would like to have that information behind the scenes. We should not be requiring catalogers to provide it, though, so we won't be. Yeah. That's okay too. It can be an imaginary character. It can be anything. If it's an individual and it has some kind of a role with regard to what you're trying to describe, you can name it and show the relationship to what you're describing.
I have a resource called I Love Kermit by Miss Piggy, and the main entry could now become Miss
Absolutely right. Yes, at the back? Yes, there are two there. Look, go ahead. Right.
The same question as somebody else had. 700, how can we just, if we're looking for the clarity for the user, couldn't we just eliminate 240 and have the 700 which says
Yes.
French translation of, and then that does it?
Actually, you're jumping to solutions for the MARC format, which would be marvelous, and we're hoping that there will be changes in the MARC format, in fact, even going beyond the MARC format within our lifetime. But yes, those are the kinds of things we're exploring. You see, these are many choices of how we can accommodate that now in the MARC format. In fact, there's one more. There's the 765 field. So there are other ways we can do it right now. And we will be exploring what we want to recommend for our own catalogers as to which way we should prefer. These are just showing you the options in MARC, not necessarily what we will choose to do. Yes, I can't see. Is it Cassie? No. Artie?
Take your example back up there. What if the title was The Digital Fortress?
Right?
In terms of representation and wanting to suck stuff up by machines, what are we going to do with runtime and users?
Again, the MARC format has a feature where you should be able to set aside that this is to be not considered for filing, and hopefully we would take advantage of that. You would transcribe it as the digital fortress, if that's how it appeared. Now, I want to point out two separate things. You're jumping to the preferred title for the work, which is not transcribed data. The transcribed data is the 245, the title of the manifestation, the title proper. That's what you would take as you see it. You're not taking the preferred name of the work as you see it, necessarily. So there's two separate things going on there. Oops. So you probably would never be choosing the digital fortress as the preferred name for the work. Not to say ever, because there may be some exceptions that would involve that. Over here, yes? Go ahead.
Yeah, you didn't show any examples with contents notes. So I'm wondering, since there's no longer going to be a rule of three, how far are we going to go in adding authors or perhaps contents notes? If we have a conference publication and it's 200 pages and there's only like 2 pages for each author, are we really going to list all of them?
What does your cataloger's judgment tell you?
I hope not.
There you are. Bravo, you would not. Yes.
I just wondered, what is the function of the 336, 37, and 30, or 336?
It's replacing the GMD that we had in the subfield H.
How's it utilized?
It's many systems now that are taking advantage of the subfield H for the GMD are using it, like in public libraries and school libraries, to say, okay, show me all the things that you have that are in microfilm, or show me all the things that you have that are on CDs. It's meant for that kind of a filtering or a display. It's also often used to display a particular icon when you show a display of the resources that you have that shows with a quick glance the visual image of what the icon is for that type of carrier, that type of content. Like, is it a music score? Is it a CD, whatever. So it's used in many ways for different display purposes and filtering capabilities. Yes, here again?
Slide 31, that's where you show the series statement numbering. And the third example is long Roman numeral.
Yeah.
Just wondering
This is transcribed data. It's the statement as you find it on the piece. It's not an access point.
well, I'm just wondering how understandable that's going to be. I mean, how many people know how to transcribe long
And when they pick up their issue of that journal, are they going to understand it when they see it on the issue of the journal they're reading? I mean, it's going to be the very same. So from a user perspective, it is what they're finding. It may be what they use in their citation because they don't know our rules in the past about changing that to an Arabic numeral. So we're trying to go with what the user is seeing and be true to that in the transcription. So all of those areas all those elements that we are transcribing, we're trying to keep the user in mind and take what they are going to be seeing. Yes, Beatrice.
Barbara,
Yes.
I'm concerned about the 300.
Yes.
When the Chinese materials present designation, they use the script as a key. So they do present it way. So when we, as you say, what we see, no, what we get, right? What you see, what you get.
This is not a transcribed area.
So what we are going to do?
Well, as I've mentioned before, you're going to give the number of pages and you would give the word pages spelled out in English. Yeah, don't worry. Yeah. The extent is not a transcribed area. Yes, Aaron again?
Is that we're supposed to be copying what we see in front of us. Does that mean we're going to end Romanization of non-Roman scripts?
No, not at all. That's an additional way to access that information. Now, one of the practices that we have held in the past, which was an unfortunate choice at the time in my view, was that we put the transliterated information as if it were being transcribed. In the 245 field, for example, we put transliterated form, not what we found on the piece. We put what we found on the piece in a parallel 800 field, basically. And that really should have been the other way around. You should have been transcribing and providing the transcription in the 245 as you found it on the piece with the transliterated form that you were providing extra in the additional access point. Now, there are ways we could clean that up, and quote unquotes, with machine capabilities to just flip those around. But we may not need to bother doing that. We may have intelligent enough systems in the future that will just recognize that's what we had as a practice, and based on what they're finding in that bibliographic record, be able to interpret it for displays. So the bottom answer, though, to your question is yes, we still will be providing transliterated information so that we can get users to that information as well. It's mostly there, if you think about it, for our own staff, for acquisition staff, for check-in staff, for shelving information, so that people that don't know those scripts will have a clue, where does this really go? What do I do with this? So it's end users who are wanting to use that information hopefully will know the language because that's why they're looking for that particular language version of it. So we're providing it mostly for other cataloging and library uses internally. But yes, we will continue to do that. There were some other questions here. Yes?
I just thought about something about the OPAC.
Actually, during this interim period where we've still got Voyager and we still have our current web OPAC, that doesn't change. We hope it will in the future, that it'll be much better in the future, but right now we're going to continue as we have it. Yes?
Did I hear you correctly that the anticipated date for a print copy of RDA would be June?
There is no print copy.
No print copy.
It's a web version. It's a web tool. Now there are the Joint Steering Committee has asked since the beginning for a concise version of RDA in a print product. And there were originally plans for functionality to be able to print out a subset of the RDA instructions related to a particular type of resource. For example, say I wanted to see all of the RDA instructions related to cataloging music scores. I would theoretically be able to tell the computer that and be able to print out a version of that for myself. Or RDA's publishers would be able to print it on demand for you to purchase. We haven't heard any word from the publishers yet as to whether that capability is really going to be there or not. So I don't know. But right now, it's just going to be a web tool. And yes, the tentative date right now is June of 2010. Other questions? Yes, here.
Will working catalogers, I have two questions about the RDA web tool. First,
Yeah.
will working catalogers be able to access it from home for recreational reading at night?
Oh, of course. Actually, we don't know what the licensing for it all is yet. I mean, this is going to be a year away, so we haven't heard at all from the publishers what the details will be. But hold that thought and ask me again in about 10 months, and maybe we'll have an answer for you. You had another one, though?
Yeah, the second question is with the annotations like sticky notes.
Yeah.
It seems like there are really two things I would want to do. One would be put sticky notes that essentially tag these new rules for my purposes so I can find them.
Yeah.
And the other would be to kind of wikify a record of decision. And it seems like if you're going to put records of decisions with examples in, you might want to integrate it with the actual LCRIs at some point.
Actually, the LCRIs will be integrated in RDA. That's what we're planning to do, not have a separate document. They will be those sticky notes. They will be there for everybody to see and share. There are several levels in the original functionality for sticky notes, and I haven't seen it working yet, so I have to start this with a caveat that I haven't seen it yet. So the sticky notes were supposed to work so that individual catalogers could put in whatever they wanted, wherever they wanted them, and that there would be shared sticky notes, either at your division level, your section, your division, your institution, or more internationally shared notes. And in your own profile, you would set up what you choose to see. So you could say, okay, I only want to see the LC policy statements, the LCPSs, which are now going to replace the LCRIs, and my own notes. And you could specify that in your profile. Or you could choose to see, okay, I want all of the ones that are agreed by AA, LL, and LCs, and you could mix and match, whatever you want. The other thing, though, in addition to a sticky note, though, is that you theoretically, again, I haven't seen the functionality yet, should be able to have standard searches of certain things that you want to look up all the time. So rather than a sticky note, you would have that in your search history about certain things that you know you want to constantly be looking up in the rules to remind yourself. So there are different functionality in the online tool that would enable you to do a lot of the things that you've said you'd like to do.
Can we put links in the sticky notes to other parts of the rules?
You know, I don't know yet. That was part of the functionality as well. It was intended that you be able to do that, but I don't know yet. I haven't seen how it works. We have two here. Yes, first here.
With change of dealing with getting new languages and having exposed language that you're not working with, the parallel title concept is really involved. Has RDA dealt with this parallel title issue? And for us who basically don't know Arabic,
Mm-hmm.
but have a title, how are we going to know what to put in? It's what you get, but how do we transliterate it?
Just as you would today. What do you do today when you get it? It would be the same as today. It's not any different as to how you put it in. We have some Onyx experiments where we're grabbing information directly from the publishers, but that's all English language material right now, and just from a selected subset of publishers. So we haven't done a lot of exploration in being able to grab things directly from publishers beyond this pilot test. So we don't know yet for that. And in terms of different scripts and being able to provide the transliterated forms, we have all those wonderful software programs that have been written already for Transliterator that are just fabulous to be able to take information in one form or another and transliterate them. Some of them require some human intervention, particularly for Hebrew, but most of the other ones work really exceptionally well. And so there's lots of capabilities and other tools that we can use beyond RDA. I think you should talk to your section or your division, and they'll hopefully help you with more. Joan, did you have something? And then the next.
Speaking of romanization.
Yes.
And scripts, especially those that go from right to left, these bracketed expressions like with for others in the 245.
Yes, I know.
Publisher not identified and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Will those be in English? Will they have to be in Roman script?
No, we need to talk about that, because my presumption was that we could go ahead and provide those in whatever languages that would make sense for our users. They're there for the users. That's the first and foremost thing to be remembering. And so if you're giving a field in Hebrew and you're going, right to left, then you should be giving that additional information, in my view, also in Hebrew, as a standard macro that you would put in. And then in your transliterated field, you would give it in the English form. But we need to talk about that some more. We don't have a final decision on it.
Good.
Yeah. There was one here and then, no? Okay, back here. Yes, go ahead.
I'm just wondering, since like V and ill, these are so common used terms that all cataloguers use.
Catalogers, that's the key.
Okay. Wait.
But it's true.
Yes, since you said that we should make it user-friendly, can't the catalogers just continue to use V and ill, but then on the OPAD, use the computer to change the V and the pages?
Unfortunately, that's not how Voyager works. But yeah, that's a beautiful idea. I mean, there are all kinds of little shortcut things that future systems, I hope, will be able to do. But right now, we have Voyager, and it can't do that. You have to put in what you get. Hold off there a second. We had another one back here first. Yes, Tom? Tom Mann, wait.
Does this have implications, none of which I am competent to foresee, on the choice for the display of subject headings and
No.
relationships in future online catalogs?
No. I say that, but RDA does have placeholders for subject kinds of terms. Remember, I showed concept, objects, events, and places as being the subjects of works. There are placeholders in RDA to address those. What we are waiting for RDA is another conceptual model known as FRSAR, the functional requirements for subject authority data, subject authority records. And once that is out and the whole review of that is done, then we will see how that should be incorporated into RDA. And there may be some future overarching principles that RDA can provide and some overarching guidelines RDA can provide about the naming of those things and the relationships of those things that can advise subject terminology. That is at least probably 5 years out at the very earliest. Yes.
Along those same lines, you're talking about these systems that are replacing Voyager. Are they actually in production and in use?
Yes.
And in what century will the library be?
Actually, there's some sites like the National Library of Sweden that uses Voyager that has actually extended that for linked data environments. And I'm really hoping that we will be able to take advantage of what they've learned. Also, Ex Libris, that is the company that owns Voyager, has extensive plans for their next generation system that also builds on RDA. They have, you may have seen a press release that they issued saying they're building on RDA, and they are taking it into account in designing their next generation system. As far as I know, their current plans for the release of that next generation system are 2012, which is a year too late for what I want to see happen in 2011. But nevertheless, they are definitely working on it. They're definitely planning it. There's some other systems, for example, VTLS's Virtua system that has been using the FRBR structure for many years now. And there are many libraries that take advantage of that. It's sort of a preliminary version of FRBR, and so there's a lot more work that can be done to make it even better, and they are working on that as well. III, Innovative Interfaces, also has in their system plans with the cloud computing and linked data structures, and their development of Sky River, which is another competitor to OCLC. All of that structure that they're getting ready is trying to build the building blocks for linked data systems and semantic web capabilities. So there's a lot of work going on right now related to this. It's just that the timelines to get there, typically with these vendor systems, are 2 to 3 years out from today before we'll actually see them. So I hope I'm still here to see them. Yes, in the back. Randy.
Multi-part items, we have a local practice for holding items records to convert volume and number designations to the English equivalent. Will that change at all? Changes to the diff part?
I don't know. Judy, do you have any? Well, we haven't really worked out all the details of all the things yet. So Judy Kuhagen might.
300, remember, Barbara said that's not a transparent field.
Does that help you?
It's recorded information. And separately, we are looking at the whole issue of how we will be recording Elsie's holdings for multi-parts.
I'm just thinking about right now when we're trying to record the holdings or items, there's a lot of mixed practice in whether we have tone and sniga for Russian.
Right.
Set of volume and number, and if you have an established practice, we're supposed to keep the established practice, but if it's a new multi-part item, we're supposed to apply the English abbreviations, and it's been a little confusing, and I wondered would this be a good time to just
Absolutely.
as long as it's romanized on the shelf, I'd like to think that the non-Russian speaking executives could still figure out if you want KN period find it.
Yeah. I think that's part of our discussions and part of our development of this. So, yeah, be sure you send the recommendation to PSD and we'll be working on these things. Other questions? I think we've got time. So, yes, back behind there. We have a limitation with Voyager, which is our big roadblock right now. In fact, it's our major brick wall that we've hit in terms of expanding the scripts that we have the ability to key in, either for our catalogers to key in or for users to key in to search. And so that's our major hang-up. It should be all of Unicode, but there are no input method editors, no keyboards for us to be able to get to some of the scripts that we really want to do. I mean, we've been waiting for years and years for Armenian. It's a prime example. And we can't do it yet because we have this brick wall of the no ability within Voyager to do that right now. I'm really hoping that that will go away with their next generation system, but I don't know. Yes?
One of the challenges for accuracy in descriptive cataloging is multi-part items. I'm wondering if this RDA is going to play well with XML wrappers so we can get kind of a drag and drop interface someday.
That's the idea. In fact, it should work much, much better with XML structures. That's the point of identifying these individual elements rather than the marked strings of stuff. By identifying them and labeling them specifically, it works much, much better in an XML environment. IFLA is also working on an XML, an RDF XML version of ISBD elements, which plays very well into the RDA element set as well. So there's a lot of work also going on related to XML versions of identifying these elements beyond what we do with MARC. Other questions? Yes?
The rules for
Corporate main entry.
going to be similar to AACR2 or are they
They are similar to AACR2. We had to carry forward a lot of the old AACR2 structures in order for this bridge period to happen, and then we will be able to revisit those later. But yes, basically all of the business with corporate entities has been carried forward. Yes? Item records are completely different, and that has nothing to do with transcription. Yeah, you'll do just what you're doing now. No changes there. Yes?
I have a question about where you say other possible workflows. Are you like entertaining actively examples of things you want to
Yes. In fact, we have quite a growing list of them. Actually, that reminds me, we should just post those on our PSD site at some point, because we have a long list of ones that we would like help developing, and we are welcoming suggestions for additional ones that would be useful. Yes, so please send them to me. Carol Davis has been our primary writer of the ones that we have so far, and he's just done a fabulous job, and we now want to expand that and get other people helping us write them. So if you're interested in helping write one, that would be even better. Yes?
Electronic or a webcast of this presentation?
Yes.
When you put that?
They're recording it. I say taping, that, you know.
Speak, and it usually takes anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks to get the webcast done. That means syncing the film with the slides that you see before you.
It'll be on the same one that the other one?
Yes.
Digital Future New webpage, and I usually send out.
But they usually don't include the question answer period, so unfortunately that part won't be there. But yes, Elizabeth?
2 questions. For this particular slide, the discussion about the series.
Yeah, the series statement.
What about the access point? Will it be,
Yeah.
what would the numbering be like? Would you have a series authority record that makes has that?
In RDA, you can provide a preferred form, and so you can come up with whatever your conventions are for doing that. At the Library of Congress, as you know, we're not providing series access points. We're only doing series statements.
Another question I had for you is on
Yep.
slide 19.
Yep.
This is the one about the errors.
Yep.
For that 260.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have anything to correct a typo error like this,
Mm-hmm.
isn't that going to adversely affect your keyword search?
If the user sees that on a citation that they have, or they are trying to look for something that they wrote down a citation based on having it at one point, they may be searching for it exactly like that. So you want to have access perhaps in both ways. In rare materials, particularly that you deal with, publishers are very important. So you would want an additional access point to fix that one. But for the most part, that doesn't matter.
So if you did want to fix that, basically, you have to
An additional access point.
10.
Right now in the MARC format, yes. In future RDA worlds, you could just give parallel information. You'd have a parallel corrected version of that element. So the name of the publisher you would see as that form, but you would also see a corrected form. That's right. Other questions? Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate your coming.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.